They've started funding us about 3 years ago, and it's been going really well. And we've been trying to get some more participants from different ethnicities and nationalities, and keep the ones that are going strong. So let's introduce ourselves so we can, so that when I refer to different groups, you'll know. So, over here, which group you work with?
My name is Devi Gishan, and I work for the Business Group, Support Group.
I'm Tilguru from the Business community.
And I'm Rupal from Buddhist group.
And I'm Simone Bacchio. I emailed M that most of you. And I just coordinate your groups.
Karasim Sina. I'm here today because part of the job they do comes to me towards the end for a survey. So that's why I'm associated. So that brings me here.
Bisnutim Sina. I also conduct surveys for the Buddhist group. My name is Chen Hanger, pronounced like Chen, my first name. I'm having a Chinese and American group for the first time. Having fun.
That's good.
My name is Susan, and I am with the Congolese community as a interpreter. I do surveys as well.
Nancy Wangi with the Congolese group.
Jack Mwangi, Congolese group too.
Oh, great. Do you want to just introduce yourself real fast? We're just doing.
Sure. My name is Brenda.
And you're with which group? Who are you helping?
I'm not sure.
What language do you speak?
Spanish. Yeah.
With the Spanish-speaking group. So we've got Bhutanese, which is 5. They're all working with the Bhutanese, with the Chinese group, and the Congolese group. And
Okay.
You need to put you just one.
Brenda. Okay. So here, make yourself at home.
Thank you.
Just doing the intro. So the 2 Spanish-speaking group leaders couldn't come today. So, but it's really important that the interpreters learn this. So that's why you're here. So anyway, Ozzy Block is our trainer today. And Ozzy generously donating her time to doing the research on what we're all doing. So part of this grant involves we're doing surveys. As those of you who have been doing this, you know we do a pre-survey and a post-survey. We ask all the group leaders to write something after each group, and the person coming to observe your group, we also capture that. And with all that, we're trying to show in a way that is meaningful in a research sense that what you're doing is helping people. Because we believe it is, but we're trying to make it more authentic research. So we have seen how some people do pre-surveys and post-surveys that look really different. And we want to see if we can make it clear to even all of us why it's important we do the surveys and what it really means and why it's important. So Ozzy is a professor at California University of Pennsylvania, professor of social work, studied at the University of Pittsburgh, and so she's going to lead our training. Okay?
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Leslie. Hi, everybody. I'm Ozzy. It's very nice to be here with all of you. So what I have prepared for today is sort of some background. So we're going to take some time and we're going to talk about some research basics to make it clear to you guys why some of this stuff matters, how sort of the peer support model you guys are doing fits into research. So obviously the point of all this is to help people to become acclimated to their new communities, to the new places where they're living, and to help ease them into living in Allegheny County, right? That's what everybody who's here is focused on doing. And part of what Leslie is saying is that what the research aims to do is to focus on demonstrating that through outcomes. So part of that is those surveys that you guys have filled out. So we're going to talk about the way to administer a survey that's sort of like the research way to do that. Because there are lots of ways to administer a survey, right, as I'm sure you can imagine. But I think there are some like ideas and concepts that are ones that you wouldn't have learned about unless maybe you have a PhD in research. So there are concepts that I want to make sure everybody here is kind of clear on so that we together can move forward in administering these surveys in a way that actually gets results so that JF and CS can make sure that this programming is tailored to the changing needs of these different populations too. Because each of these populations is going to need new and different things, and these surveys are going to tell us about that. So, Leslie, Simone, if you move us forward onto the next slide. This is what our schedule is for today. So we'll take a couple breaks. I understand better than anyone, because I teach undergraduate students, that we all need a break and our brains turn off after a while. So we'll have snack breaks, and we're actually going to spend, some of this time is on these slides, but then a good chunk of our time is going to be actually practicing administering the surveys to one another. And some of that's going to be within your group, like the Bhutanese within Bhutanese, but some of it's going to be cross-culturally too, so you guys can see how that works, how administering a survey should always be the same regardless of if somebody's from the same culture as you or different cultures, speaks the same language, or any of those kinds of things. So the objectives for today, if you will move us forward, so thank you, Simone, look at you, you're doing awesome. These are the things that hopefully you'll all be able to do by the end of today's training. So identify and explain some basic research concepts that are relevant to the peer support group model. To understand the importance of minimizing interviewer bias in the impact of the outcomes of these surveys. And then also demonstrating what skills are needed to administer them, so that you will actually show by the end of this that you guys are able to administer these surveys in a way that's going to minimize your bias that you may intentionally or unintentionally be putting into doing surveys. Because I know when I finally went through like a training like this, I realized that for many years I had been putting bias into my questionnaires just in the way I used my voice, like the intonation of my voice. So some things to, these are the kinds of things we'll be talking about today. And I also want you to feel free to interrupt me and ask questions. This isn't a lecture, this is very I want you to feel free to stop me, just raise your hand, and we can talk. Okay, so what's research? I think that's an important first question, because I don't want anybody getting the idea here that this is meant to study people in a glass sphere, that I'm proposing that, or that Leslie wants that, or that anybody wants that. But the purpose of research is really to be able to look at these materials, right, the peer support groups, and then be able to establish what facts and reach new conclusions about what supports are needed. So as the Bhutanese community becomes more and more, saturated into Allegheny County and Pittsburgh and builds up new businesses and new things that they need, how is this peer support group model going to need to shift to fit their ever-changing needs? Similar for the Congolese, similar for Chinese Americans, similar for any different groups that are here, right? And we need to think about what that's going to look like. So this research that we're talking about that's being done with the surveys is what's called outcomes research. Because really what we're focused on is, what's the outcome of the peer support group? How does this person who was in this group for 8 weeks, what do they look like at the end? Do they have a wider social network? Do they know more about what services are available to them? Are they more connected into their community? So again, we're really focused on these outcomes as the lives of the group members and how those have improved over that period of time. Okay, so we want to, again, the surveys demonstrate this. And what we're doing now is we've changed the model of how the surveys are being done, which some of you guys may have noticed. We're actually tracking people's data individually, in a sense, because it's one way you can look at research is, here's how everybody was doing beforehand, and here's how everybody's doing afterwards. And you can draw some conclusions about pre and post data like that, where it's one group at the beginning, and then 8 weeks later, the same group at the end. But you know a lot more about how someone's doing when it's the same person, beginning and end. So, if I were to look at all of you guys and how you're doing now versus how you're doing at the end, what does that look like for you? So, and that's a really significant thing too, because we know in the research world that we can do more sophisticated analysis of data when we're able to look at one person across time rather than 10 people, and then maybe it's the same 10 people, maybe somebody dropped out of the group. We want to be able to match that data. So this idea of following people, which is something Simone has really been focused on, and ensuring that we connect the surveys to, we want to maintain confidentiality, but we also want to ensure that we are able to match that data so we can see how individual people have improved as well. And also, again, we want to be able to replicate this program. There are other places in the United States who are getting more and more refugees. As you guys, as we watch the news, as we see what's happening in our world, we know that this is something that other communities are going to need access to. So we want to be able to give them our training materials and say to them, hey, we know this peer group works. We want to be able to give you this, and now, hey, you can do this with your population that's living in Wyoming, or Cleveland, or Atlanta, or any of these places. So that's really important too. Research allows you to replicate things. Okay, so this slide kind of, and again, you guys have these slides here, so if there's any thing you want to reflect on later, or if you want to email me about, I can give everybody my contact information too. The scientific method refers to how we, the way that we study something. And I sort of wanted to reflect on this with you guys because I think it's a good step back when we're looking forward into whether the outcome's going to be of this, how are we going to change these peer groups over time, how are we going to add and enhance these groups to meet the ever-changing needs of these different populations. So some of the things that happen when you're doing scientific method are this acronym called TROUT. And trout's a kind of fish and common in the United States. And so the TROUT acronym refers to tentative, so that everything we think today is really open to question and subject and reassessment. It can be modified, it can be refuted. R, that it can be replicated. So the best study needs to be able to be replicated. If you can't replicate the science, it's worthless. So you have to be able to replicate it, right? Think about any medication. If somebody says, oh, we came up with this medication and it saves people from cancer, and then nobody else can actually create that medication, what have we really achieved, right? Not much. So we have to be able to replicate it, which is what I'm talking about with this peer group model. If this peer group model is successful with the Bhutanese, and what we do here in Pittsburgh actually makes a lot of difference in people's lives, but we can't replicate it outside of Pittsburgh, that's not the best. We would like to be able to say to somebody else, here, take this package, take what we've done, and do this in California. Do this in New York, do this in, wherever we find other Bhutanese populations living and working. Observation, again, so that knowledge is only grounded really in the comprehensive observation of things. So this is why we're doing a pre and a post survey. So part of this is we want to get an idea of where everyone is at in the group before the group starts. So we can kind of see what we call a baseline. What exists at this point in time? What's their knowledge? How comfortable are they with their community? How isolated are they? How connected in are they? So that we actually can compare that to how they're doing at the end. So we can see that this peer group has actually been effective in enhancing those things and opening them up. Unbiased, again, we really want those observations to be unbiased, which is why we don't have the people who are the group leaders doing these post surveys, right? It's really important that the same people who are running the group aren't the same people who are doing those surveys. And then finally, transparency. Again, that everything's really open. Everyone can see what's happening, nobody's hiding anything, but that's a very, it's an open method. So this is what good research looks like. It includes all of these different elements. Okay, so some of the things that can happen that aren't the best are when we overgeneralize. And this is, I think, one of the caveats that happens a lot in research, especially in community-based research, is that we can look at a couple of isolated incidents as being an example of a phenomenon that's happening, throughout the whole city of Pittsburgh, right? Let's say in downtown there were 2 shooting deaths. Somebody might then say, oh, there's a murder problem in the city of Pittsburgh. Well, if you looked at the statistics for the city and looked at how things look, actually that's not true. We have this, we have 1 million people living in Allegheny County, and there have been 5 murders in a month. That's actually very low per capita for the United States. So you don't want to make overgeneralizations about information. And I think for these peer groups, what we can think about is we don't want to think that they're either more beneficial than they really are or less beneficial than they really are. We don't want to generalize outside of what we really know as being sort of the truth of what these groups are actually able to achieve, right? It's an important thing to not overgeneralize in that way. And then selective observation, this is something that a lot of researchers do, which is when you kind of stop looking at the people who aren't doing well and only focus on the ones who are doing well. And again, that can be very dangerous in research because it means you're not tending to those who aren't going to show the result you want. And we want to be really careful that this isn't also not something that's happening when we're doing this kind of research, because we want to make sure that everybody who's a part of the peer group is part of that, what we're observing in terms of results. Okay, so then there's a couple of different kinds of research. And what's interesting about the survey that you guys do is that it's a mixture of what we call quantitative research and qualitative research. So quantitative research is numbers. You know, you see on your surveys, actually, maybe I'll have, Leslie, the surveys are in the back there in a folder. If we pass them around, it might be helpful for people to like refresh themselves. On the surveys, we have questions that ask about like, how many friends you have in Pittsburgh, you know, what are some of the other things on there? Do you have one in front of you?
What can you access by yourself?
Yeah, what can you access by yourself? So there's a bunch of questions that are like circle me, right? That's a quantitative question. But a qualitative question is give me some feedback on that. An open-ended question, like tell me how you feel about that. And those are different kinds of research. And because as I'm sure you guys understand, not every person is a talkative person. Not every person wants to give you all the qualitative data, right? And then there are going to be some people who you interview who are really chatty and want to tell you all about, you know, their feelings about how this went for them. So we have to be careful about how we interpret those kinds of data too, because they're different, and because of the nature of this survey, we kind of leave it up to the person whether or not they want to elaborate on, you know, that qualitative data. Right, so we want to make sure that we are really being true to what the person is saying, but that also, and this is something we'll talk about more as we get into the like application of this stuff, that we want to be sure to understand that these are two different kinds of data, and they kind of tell us two different things, quantitative versus qualitative. Okay, so anonymity and confidentiality. You guys already might know the difference between these terms, so you can ignore me if you already know, but when something's anonymous, it means you don't know who did it. It's totally unknown to you. If somebody fills out a survey, they hand it in, you cannot connect that back to their name. But when something's confidential, it means that you can do that, but it maybe doesn't say their name on the sheet. It might say the number 57. So now this sheet that the person has filled out says number 57 on it, you hand it in to Simone, but Simone has a list that says 57 is Roop. So now she knows that 57 is Roop's data, but let's say Till didn't know that 57 was Roop, so he just hands him, hands back in 57. That doesn't mean anything to him. That's what confidentiality is. It's keeping people's information private and secret because it's not necessary for Roop or Till, for Roop to know Till's information, for Till to know Roop's information in that way. So this is an important piece of these surveys. As we're talking about matching data, it's going to become, and that's a different thing. It used to be that this data was just what we call aggregate data, right? Where we just did a bunch of pre-surveys, we handed them in, we were like, hey, this is Roop's group, he just ran, 20 people filled out the questionnaire, here they are. And we didn't know who this 20, we knew who they were, but we didn't know whose survey was whose, right? So now we're moving to a model where we're actually tracking. So it's really important that we maintain confidentiality in this way. It's going to be better data for JF&CS. They're going to be able to tell you more about the success of these groups. But now we've enhanced this piece of the data is no longer anonymous, and now we've moved on to confidentiality, and that's an important thing to consider as well. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Okay, so again, like this piece of like, we never want to use these terms synonymously. They don't mean the same thing. They are different things. And when we're talking now about these surveys, I think it's important that you tell the folks who are filling them out that this is confidential information. And JF&CS is there to protect their privacy, but so that they know, and we're going to actually work on a script for you guys, for those of you who are administering the surveys, so you can actually say exactly what we want you to say to them, which is like, hey, you're going to take the survey, we are going to keep your name separate from this data, but we want you to know that we're going to do everything to protect your data, and because these aren't like deep questions, this isn't like social security numbers or like income or like anything like that, but people still want to know that their information is private, and I really respect that. And we want to make sure that they understand that that's important to us too, and we're de-identifying that information by using a number instead of their name. So we're gonna write a really nice script for you guys so that you can do that in an easier to use way. Okay. All right, so measurements and what this like idea of a culturally competent measure is. So all these surveys have been translated. And they've been translated into, and many of you were involved in the translation of these things. So part of what I wanted to talk about here was kind of the idea of like what language problems can still come up in these sorts of scenarios, just to kind of introduce them as ideas that I want everybody to kind of be aware of and be cognizant of as they're using these surveys. But usually what we do, and I don't think this has happened in this way, and this is something again, like, we can maybe talk about here, Leslie, or talk about another time. But usually what happens when you translate a survey is somebody translates it, it's looked at by that individual, and they kind of check it over, like, okay, this looks good. And then they give it to some whole other person who's also bilingual, and they translate it back. And then you compare the first survey that was the original English survey and the newly translated back to English survey, and you see how well they match. And if they match well, great. But if you find holes there, that means there's something wrong with the middle. Do you know what I mean? So that's an important piece of translation, and I don't know if that's the process what's been gone through. It's just kind of the first piece. So I think that's something to consider and to think about, because this is kind of what's seen as the gold standard in translation, is that we translate, back translate. And so, it's really then, and then we do dry runs of that to make sure that that really does work. Have other people who, are not native English speakers take that third survey and ensure that they can, again, that it all makes sense, but that this back translation happens too. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and cultural bias. So this is one of those things that can happen in terms of like a term like friend. In one culture, friend might mean something very different from in another culture. And there are words like that on this survey that could have one meaning in another culture versus somebody else's culture. And what's interesting is, even as all of you came from other places to Pittsburgh, you have assimilated somewhat, right? You're dressing a little differently, you're eating slightly different foods, you're watching different TV, you're using different soaps, right? Like, you have to, because you're living in this country and maybe those things aren't available that were available in the country that you lived in before. And as those changes start to happen, we assimilate in ways we're not aware of, and it can actually affect the way that we read things. I see my father do this all the time. My father's from Iran, and so when he, just even when we're in Iran, or just when we come back, he thinks he's doing these things that are very like, I don't know, like Iranian, and then he runs into somebody who's just recently from Iran, and they're like, what are you doing? It's like, they look at him like, and it's funny, because it's like true, right? We all know what I'm talking about. It's this like, levels of when we get kind of used to our new culture and like, don't even realize that we've left something behind of our own culture. And no, I'm not dogging on that or saying that's bad, or I'm saying nothing of that. I'm saying that it can also affect how we interpret surveys. It can affect how we interpret words. It can affect how we, it impacts the way we are biased in administering a survey. So I think a lot of pre-testing can help in this way too. So that's something else to talk about as well. Okay, so this is the back translation process I was talking about. So this is again, I'm not going to go over this in detail since I just did a slide ago, but this is that piece where we want to make sure that the survey really can be back translated too. Okay, and that's a slide that explains it. I know. Why did I include that? I did. Okay, so conceptual equivalence. This is when we look at the survey and we make sure that it's really following the concepts we want to follow. And I think everybody here is pretty comfortable with this survey at this point, feels that it's actually getting at the information that needs to be got at, and I think everybody's pretty happy with the data that's being collected from this survey in particular. Okay. So, asking questions. So part of doing these surveys, especially, we have a number of people who are pre-literate, right? Who you are administering the survey to because they cannot read or write in their native language. So that's why interpretation is needed, right? So one of the things we want to do is there's certain kind of language things we want to avoid because they can lead to bias in ways that are only sort of now beginning to be understood really definitely. But the word no and not which this survey actually does a pretty good job of it's not using the word not a lot. And using short items, it does a nice job of not giving a lot of answer choices, it's pretty to the point. And it does, again, deal in this sort of making sure it's succinct to the point, but it does give this room for qualitative answers. And that's something I've seen anecdotally, is that in some populations, we have tons of qualitative data, and then in others, none at all. And I'm certain that can't be all just the population. I'm sure that has something to do with like interpretation as well. So, and I recognize that sometimes that's just a cultural thing. People are like, I don't want to really get into that, I'll just answer your question. And it's thinking through, and that's why we're taking a big portion of today to actually practice administering these questionnaires, so that we can feel comfortable with getting that qualitative data too. Okay. So when we do these kind of program evaluations, like I was telling you guys earlier, we do want to really know how successful the program is. We want to know if there are any problems that are happening, that if there are ways that the program is actually ineffective or harmful, because I don't think that's happening here, but we need to know if that's happening. So that's why, again, this pre-post piece is going to be really important. And then also, planning and developing future programs. So as this program changes, and we want to shape what we're offering for the peer groups moving into the future. And again, is it summative or is it formative? And I think we're doing both here. I know that right now a lot of what the focus is on how successful we're being in the here and now, but I don't, I see in the future for JF&CS, if they want to get additional funding or look to other ways to, expand the peer group model, that's going to then be data that they're using in a more formative way. Okay, so I think that Leslie in general has been pretty happy, and I think JF&CS has been pretty happy with the cost effectiveness of these programs, and I think the county especially as well, right? They are very happy with the outcomes that they're seeing. They're seeing a real buffering of people's kind of health and wellness by being involved in these peer groups, and I really think they're achieving what people want them to achieve, so that's great. But a lot of that is still at this point very anecdotal. It doesn't yet have the research base behind it that I think everybody wants it to have. So I think that this survey, as it continues to be rolled out, will really help to achieve that. And again, it's cost effective, which I think is a really important piece. We're not involving computer programs that are really expensive or anything like that. It's like a paper and pencil survey. It's pretty easy to use. I've been free so far. I mean, this has all been a very good, cost-effective modality for everyone. Okay. Okay, unforeseen circumstances. So sometimes something will happen where an interpreter is not available, or somebody gets sick, or something happens to prevent Group Until from running the group, or other things can happen to impact the quality of groups. And these are the kind of things that I think a lot of people have done a nice job of telling Leslie about when something's come up that's affected a group. In those at the end of the group, when you send them that summary of here's what happened in this week's group, or here's what's been happening over the last few weeks. That information allows us to also know if there's anything that could have maybe affected the data or impacted people's, the results of those kinds of surveys. So, that's the place for us to be able to capture that information too. And one of the best things you can do in research is triangulate. So we're getting information from the clients themselves, right? The peers themselves, and then we're getting information back from the interpreters, and we're getting information from the group leaders. So all that information together tells us a story, 3 parts. And I think that's a really important piece to remember here too, is that we're not just getting data from the clients, we're getting data from other sources too, to get a full picture. Okay, so this is more and again, ethnography as a piece of all of this. We haven't done focus groups or sat people down and say hey, what'd you think of the peer groups? And I think this is something maybe JF&CS will look at doing in the future, but ethnography as an idea is the idea of getting people to talk about the narrative of how they've been influenced by something, or what their experience has been of something. And I think I was at the JCC when there was that photo exhibit that was up, the one woman's trip to a refugee camp, and then there were the pictures of and just stories of people who come from Bhutan. And what was really interesting about that was that that gave a full story and through pictures. And what ethnography does is it does that through like people's descriptions and stories. So these are some other ways that JFC has to kind of make you guys aware. If there are other ways in the future where if they do focus groups, or if they do, want to interview people individually to do ethnographies, that these are other ways to kind of build up their knowledge of what's happening for these populations as they kind of settle into lives in Pittsburgh. Okay, and the other term I kind of wanted you guys to be aware of was participatory action research. Because a lot of this research we're talking about here is very different from like, I'm sure you guys are familiar with UPMC. We all live in Pittsburgh. They're the big conglomerate hospitals, they do a lot of medical research. But they don't do a lot of participatory action research, which is really led by the peers themselves. And I would say, and you guys in that sense are the leaders in this way, right? You're sort of seen as important people in your communities, where people can go to with questions. You now have what we call leader power in your communities. And that's significant because that's different than the way a lot of research has traditionally been done in the United States. A lot of times it's people coming in saying like, I know what your problem is and I'm going to solve it for you. And it's kind of like research at people rather than research with people. And the whole point of this, looking at these surveys, is to merely improve these programs. It's not to like study and treat, it's to help and ensure that the quality is there. So I think that's important too, to understand that this is like research that comes from a very different angle, and that is like, sometimes when you talk to folks, when people see a survey, they kind of maybe, I don't know, they feel like they're being studied, and that doesn't leave them feeling at ease. So I guess I would ask you guys, how do people feel when you do the surveys, the pre and post surveys? Do you think they're at ease? Do you think, like, what's the general feeling from the clients? Yeah.
A lot of times it's hard to get answers from them, they just don't want to go ahead with the questions that we ask. But since I'm doing from the very beginning, I know how to, ask them, multiple times to get the answers. But yeah, they are not, a lot of, especially the Buddhist community, I think they don't know about the surveys. They have never done any kind of surveys.
Yeah.
So when we say that this is a survey, this will help us plan future workshops,
Yeah.
They said, oh, everything is good, things like that.
Yes. I like that. So do you think it's just like, that they're reticent to share information, or do you think it's just like culturally they've never, like,
No,
surveys is not a part of life?
I think it's because they don't really know, that this is going to help
Yeah.
plan certain workshops,
Yeah.
Whenever I ask, there's a question there, what other programs would you like to do? Would you like to attend or do? And they said, I don't know, but whatever program, GFCS brings in, we'll take it.
Yeah.
A lot of times they say that.
Yeah.
So, I think it's just, people.
Yeah.
Only one client so far I have done the survey said she's interested to learn driving.
Okay.
So far, just one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Driver's
It's
ed.
nothing that she's interested to learn this.
Yeah. Has anybody else felt that people have had?
Yeah. A lot of people that I survey, they said more English classes because, they want to learn
Yeah.
English. And I said, there are English classes, go to this English class. But still, they say, more English classes.
Yeah. What about others of you? Are people pretty comfortable with
I
yeah.
feel as though like mine do the same thing as well, but as soon as you explain to them that this is the reason why I'm calling and how will it benefit you, and
Yes.
once you start saying, oh, did you make friends or would you like to make friends, and they go up,
Yeah.
they say, oh, it's actually very good. I've met so many people, I've met friends, and they teach me to meet other people, and they really enjoy that.
Good.
Yeah, so once you talk to them, they open up.
Yeah.
When we talk, the first thing in the question is like, will help, whether it will help me make friend or whether it has helped me make friend. So especially in Buddhist community, friend for the older people, like if they are 60 or 70 and they still attend these classes, it takes time for them to, get that friend word, in them and then say that, oh yes, I made a friend. They don't take their peers, whoever come there as friend, so
it's, I don't know, culturally or what,
Yeah.
you know, it's a little
So
difficult to
is the
explain word friend.
Yeah, so what would they call them, or what would be a more appropriate term?
We made, there were people, you know, there were like, they call it, you know, people, community people, you know,
Mhm.
but not really friends, so.
Yeah, friend isn't really a.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Leslie.
For
Maybe we
us,
shouldn't use that word.
the Congolese group, because they live mostly in the Crafton area,
Yeah,
they see each other as neighbors or
Yeah,
just,
something like that, yeah.
refugees from the same camp or
Mhm.
maybe from the same country or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah, so they connect themselves as that,
yeah,
but not like, okay, this is my buddy. No.
right. That's what I mean. I do feel, and that's an important thing. I think there are some words like that in this survey that, you know, part of what back translation does is finds those things, but, you know, I think if the word friend isn't really working, it's something like neighbor would work better, or, I don't, you know, peer, but is that a word that translates? I don't know,
I don't think so either.
Right, so is neighbor the most, I mean, what do you call people who live in your community?
What do we call? Sati भन्दैन त हामीले हैन, like we don't say sati, yeah, it's no friend. So, especially the older people,
Yeah,
you know, they call by relation, you know, like there's always a relationship to address.
yeah.
So, they don't really call themselves friends.
Mhm.
So
It's
it's
acquaintance?
connections.
No, it doesn't even sound like it's that, it's a different orientation,
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? This like idea of like friendship is very like, I don't know, it's not American even, I don't know what it is.
I think to make a friend, it takes a while, you know, it takes a couple of years to make a friend.
Yes,
So just meeting 2-3 times is not a friend, you know.
sure.
That's why I think people are not getting the Mexican friend.
I think that's why Simone used that word acquaintance. That's what we call somebody in the United States when somebody isn't your friend yet. You are familiar to them, you call them your acquaintance. But that's a very complicated word. Yeah,
It's
I
not
know.
warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, it's right, it's not warm and fuzzy. Well, but see, that's a good discussion. That's good, because I feel like that word friend is a little loaded. So maybe we need to look at how that works. Okay, all right, okay, can you move me on from here?
I have more to
Yes.
share, but maybe
Yeah.
we'll move on and then we'll share it, or you want me to do it now?
No,
That might come later.
Well,
Um,
well, what,
you know, when we do surveys,
yes,
a lot of people, especially the English community people, have, you know, hearing difficulties.
yeah,
So, they are not able to either, they will hold on the phone and then when I ask one question, they will say something, okay, something else, you know, they're not able to do
they
it.
can't hear you.
And some people don't even speak, you know, but they still attend. So I don't know if we are allowed to, you know, meet them and do a survey or just, you know, leave it blank.
Yeah, I think that sounds like something we should talk about that. If there are people who can't hear you, it doesn't make sense to do it by phone because that's not meeting their need. So it might be that those are folks who have to be met in person to do surveys with, but then probably blocking us
I think that
aside time.
Every time I do, there are a couple of them, you know, in the list that who have hearing problem and speech problem.
Yeah, not just hearing problem, is not being able to speak. We have times like that too. So there's no way we can go and talk in person and get this done.
So, and when you say they can't speak, do you mean that they actually don't have a voice? Or do you mean that they, okay. So how do they usually communicate? They do sign language or
probably
something?
sign language. I think family members have a different way of communicating.
Okay.
I can say family language.
Family language.
Family
actually.
language,
Yeah.
okay.
Because if we say sign language, many of our such community members, they never took training.
Yeah, they don't know.
So
But still
probably
they communicate.
something we have to do then is on the survey, note if it, and this is something I talked to Simone and Leslie about, we have to note if it was like the person did the survey to themselves, an interpreter administered the survey, or if a family member assisted them with completing the survey. Because I think that's an important variable to look at too, because it might be significant at some point, or it might not at all. But sometimes if a family member helps them do the survey, I'm sure you guys can relate to this, it also becomes translated slightly through that person, whether you wanted to or not. So that's something to consider as well. But I mean, again, like, we want the data. So I guess the question is, how can JF&CS help with, making that happen that's not completely cost prohibitive? Because, I think that's one thing we have to consider is like, we can't just like spend $1 million on the survey process, but like how do we reasonably do that and like meet all those needs? So definitely food for thought, yeah.
Yeah, I would like to share a little bit about my group. My
Sure.
group is a little bit different. They're not most, but some of them are like really new immigrants. So when some of my group members, when they fill in the survey, they have no problem with that. They just like finish the day that I work at school all the time. You feel that way. But for other people, especially they just came here like a couple months, it's really hard for her to start to settle down to do the survey. For my understanding, it could be not correct, exactly correct. So one is the Chinese immigrant population more famous on like highly educated. You got a doctor job, you got IT guys. So because the stereotype for Chinese immigrant is so strong, so it totally really prevents some people who really need help from getting the help.
Yeah, sure.
So for them, they also don't really want to share their issues. So when we ask them like, do you feel lonely, and do you feel like do you have support here, and do you have friends at Pittsburgh? I don't want to talk about that. Like I haven't like feel comfortable enough to share that story because other people's story are like so successful. Or why my story is so miserable. Like I don't want to share that.
Yeah.
So I just want to share that it's two different directions.
And I think too, hopefully if we create this script to read at the beginning, one of the things that can help with that is sharing the like confidentiality parts. And while that might not buffer that completely and get rid of that, letting people know that their name's not going to be on the survey and that it's really information to help other people like themselves to acclimate. Sometimes then if people believe that their name's not on there and that if they're honest it'll help, they're more willing to be honest, you know? But you have to say it to them in the right way that's going to allow for them to like let their shield down a little bit to do that. But I agree with you that there are just, especially somebody who's so new, sometimes it's going to be hard to do that. So we have to also think hard about like how to prepare people for, I guess, what these groups are meant to do too, you know, like that this model here is meant to like open your world up and help you to acclimate to Pittsburgh. And so, I don't know, like the positive stereotype stuff is very hard. I think especially in the Asian American community in general, I think many people coming from Laos, Thailand, wherever they come to the United States and people have this expectation that they're going to be IT, they're going to be doctors, and then if they're like, no, I do nails, people are like, what? You know, and that's very difficult. That's a very difficult experience. And I think, you know, it's hard with a survey like this because you can't, how do you get it back, you know? So we have to think about that, if there's a way for us to write a script that can help to, again, like let that shield down a little bit. Yeah.
And going back to asking them whether they are able to make friends,
Yes.
I think for our community members, like if we can put a question something like this, like, are you able to get reconnected with your community members, or are you able to socialize with your community members?
Yeah.
I think they can be more open and
So you think the word community member might be a more meaningful one than the term friend? Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. I think that, and that's the kind of thing when we go in the later part, when we do the surveys with one another, I think that's what's going to help in thinking about terminology and getting that kind of feedback. Leslie?
So maybe around the resistance to say how they're feeling, we also can share that maybe some of us have felt lonely, you know,
sure,
when we
yeah.
came. We can also, we can refer people. We want to connect people to resources. So
Yes.
while we're not doing therapy in this group, one survey in all these years, came back, someone said they wanted to hurt themselves.
Yeah.
And it was just buried in the pack. We just happened to see it. No one came to me and said, oh my God. But we do want to connect people, and that's really important. I want to make sure we bring that up sometime today.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
We have resources now. If anyone sees anybody feeling or saying,
Yeah, depression, anxiety, anything.
we want to just,
Self-harm.
well, we can help you, not in the group necessarily.
Right.
But part of the reason for this group is to catch that.
Yes. That the
Because
group might
in the
not be the place
suggested
where it's
process-
resolved, but the group is the place to catch it and get them to the higher level of care they need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Leslie, do you mean that even the interpreters, like those who make these surveys, complete these surveys, if we find someone speaking something like that, do you want us to alert you?
I would think.
I think so.
It didn't happen to, I don't know who.
I think I have done once.
And she had already gotten help by the time we finally, but what did you say about, I would think we should be alerted.
I think probably you should say something in that script too that says like, if you let me know that you're, at risk of harming yourself or others, I want to refer you to a case manager at JFNCS, would you be okay with that? If they say yes, then you can just, if they tell you something, that's probably say, remember at the beginning when I said to you, if you said something about harming yourself or others, well, what you said to me earlier, I'm just a little worried about your safety. Do you think I could take you to go talk to Dawn or whoever it is that's gonna be the referral?
It's not common in our community, someone saying that on.
Yeah, to be so open
in
about it,
case.
yeah.
Like I complete, for example, 12, 15 surveys, and then I keep it, mail it, or wait for a day to reach to JFNCS office.
Yeah.
It will have, I think, some 6-7 days will have passed since I heard that from the respondent. And then I don't know how long it will take again at JFNCS to turn and check.
Yeah. So
let
I
us
think,
know.
yeah, so let's talk
Okay.
about that too, a way for us to catch people at an earlier point if we're noticing something that's happening that's self-harm or harm of others.
I just have a very, very quick center,
Sure.
and like as a case manager, as also as a licensed social worker.
Yeah.
So we report when people try to harm themselves or try to harm others, and child abuse.
Yeah.
But other than that, like if I have an undocumented child, if they smoke marijuana.
Right. We don't want to about those things. That's
Yeah.
fine, whatever.
Okay, but if they like, they try to kill themselves or
Yeah.
try to kill others, and they have a plan for that, so.
And I guess too, the other question is like, as a social worker, you're a court-mandated reporter, but as an
Yeah.
interpreter, I don't think that you are necessarily.
Yeah,
So
so
that
that
becomes a
becomes
like
shared.
other, right.
Yeah.
So I think that's why if we in the script say, if you say those things, we want to refer you for services, is that okay with you? Then you've kind of warned them that if they talk about that kind of stuff, you care, and you're gonna do something about it. Which I think is good, and I think we can write that in a way that's like, shows care and compassion for
But
that.
we did add that, I think it's the post survey, maybe not the pre, but we did add that about connecting to services and do we have permission to contact you, but I don't know if that's enough to cover for that particular scenario, or if.
Well, and I guess that's also if it's only happening at the post point of the group, whereas I think probably you would get more of this kind of stuff
Right.
reported at the beginning, I would guess, because by the time they're in the group, they have the peer leaders at their ear, they have somebody to talk to. Am I right about that you're hearing this more at the beginning? So probably we need to include it in some kind of script. But we're actually at our 3 o'clock break.
Sometimes,
Yeah.
the group leaders have come to us and they're saying, this person doesn't have any money, their husband's beating them up.
Yeah.
So that type of stuff, you can bring to us at any time.
Yes, right, sure. Okay, well, why don't we're gonna take a break at 3. It seems like a good time. Everybody seems like they could use a little stretch and food. So we'll just take a 10-minute break.
Ready for the break. All right, how many people want coffee? I'm going.
Everybody does.
Yeah.
And cream and sugar and cups and everything. You won't be back in a year, sooner than that.